Hi everyone and welcome. I'm Gloria Vanessa Nicoli, one of the Rebelle featured artists of 2024. Today, I'll be sharing my painting process using the amazing Rebelle software. Since the full process is quite long, I'll be speeding up the video. Alright, let's jump in and start painting. This piece is a watercolor-style fantasy illustration. My original idea was to create a character transforming into a phoenix, but as I worked through the draft, my concept kept evolving. In the end, I kept the fiery essence of the phoenix while exploring a floating pose I had never drawn before, just to challenge myself. Here for the background, I'm adding a full moon. The Rulers tool in Rebelle makes it super easy to draw a perfect circle. It's also great for parallel lines, concentric circles, and perspective grids, etc., saving a ton of time. You can open this tool window by going to Window in the main menu bar. All the panel-based tools mentioned later can also be found here. At this stage, I tested different graphite pencil brushes to get a feel for them and started refining the line art. I like my drafts to be detailed and clear, as it helps make the coloring process smoother later on. It's also a good idea to have a rough idea of your color palette at this stage, so you don't have to make too many decisions while painting. The line art doesn't need to be super clean. Personally, I like to leave some hand-drawn texture. It makes the final painting feel more natural and keeps me from feeling restricted by overly polished lines. Here, I also used a really handy tool, the liquify push tool in the smudge and liquify section. What I love about Rebelle's version of this tool is that you can use it just like a brush, without needing to open a separate liquify panel. It makes fine-tuning adjustments quick and seamless. Just a quick tip, make sure to check liquify push in the properties panel before using it. Otherwise, you might accidentally smudge your image instead of making precise adjustments. Next, let's move on to coloring. In the early stages, I like to use a 100% opacity brush to apply the base colors. I use a basic watercolor brush, but adjust the opacity to full. This does take away some of watercolor's natural transparency, but I do it for a reason. Many of my illustrations need a transparent background for PNG export. If I were to use semi-transparent watercolors, the saved image would also have transparency, which isn't ideal for clip art. Normally, if I want to maintain that watercolor transparency, I let the paper color show through as the base. But for this piece, I'm applying solid base colors instead. By the way, when setting up layers for coloring, I always turn on the Use Color Pigment button whenever the layer blending mode is set to normal. I'm not too deep into the technical details of how this function works, but visually, I can definitely see the difference. When it's turned on, the colors blend more vividly and appear brighter. When it's off, the colors tend to look a bit dull or grayish. Because of this, I prefer to keep it on for a richer and more vibrant look. Next, I want to introduce two functions I use all the time when painting watercolors, almost as often as the undo shortcut Ctrl+C. The first one is fast dry. As you know, when painting on a wet canvas, watercolor spreads quickly. Sometimes, to keep it from spreading too much, you need to stop it immediately. But if you dry the entire canvas, any new strokes won't blend naturally with the previous colors, creating unwanted hard edges. That's where fast dry comes in. It doesn't dry the whole canvas, just stops the strokes you've painted while keeping the canvas wet. This way, when you add new colors, they will still blend gradually and naturally. This is the function I use the most. The second is dry the layer, which is a more typical drying function. As the name suggests, it completely dries the entire layer, locking in everything you've already painted. Any new strokes will no longer blend with the previous ones, preventing colors from spreading or smudging. I know I've already introduced quite a few tools in Rebelle, but there are just so many useful features that I can't help myself. I have to share more with you. Now, let's talk about another super handy tool in Rebelle, stencils. This feature allows you to create a template using any image shape, so your colors will only appear within that defined area. For example, in this piece, I wanted to add a lace pattern to the character's clothing near the shoulder. If I tried to paint it by hand, it would take forever, and the result might not be as precise as I'd like. But with a lace pattern stencil, all I had to do was lightly brush over it, and the pattern was applied instantly. Quick, effortless, and super convenient. Now for the highlight metallic material. This feature is absolutely my favorite. Unlike the special brushes I used in other software to create metallic effects, which often ended up looking like textures rather than naturally blended surfaces, Rebelle's metallic material gives a much more organic and realistic result. In other programs, achieving this kind of effect usually requires extra painting techniques and additional tweaks. In Rebelle, all you need to do is enable the metallic material layer button in the layer panel. Once activated, any strokes made with oil and acrylics brushes on this layer will automatically have a metallic sheen. Different brushes create different surface textures and reflections, making the effect even more versatile. Plus, in the visual settings panel, you can fine-tune the reflectivity, scale, and strength of the metallic layer, giving you endless possibilities to adjust and customize the look. Originally, I planned to paint metallic armor for her, but in the end, it turned out looking more like metallic soft armor, which I actually quite like. I also used metallic material for the satin fabric behind her, but with a different brush than the one I used for the soft armor. This is why they have completely different textures. One feels rigid, while the other remains soft and flowing. To achieve the look I wanted, I experimented with multiple brushes and settings. One thing to keep in mind is that oil and acrylics brushes have a certain thickness effect. If you paint underneath a watercolor layer, it can push the watercolor layer outward, creating unintended depth. To avoid this, make sure to erase any excess strokes that extend beyond the intended area. Finally, it's time to complete the background, foreground, and the flames. When painting the background, I kept reminding myself not to get too caught up in architectural details. The more I tried to refine them, the harder it was to achieve the right effect. Instead of focusing on accuracy, I found that capturing the feeling of the scene worked much better. For the flames, I experimented with multiple layers and different blending modes to achieve the right look. All of these layers were copied from the base flame color layer, allowing me to build up the effect step by step. To soften the edges and create a glowing effect, I used Gaussian blur, which you can find under Filter in the main menu bar. Here's how I layered them from top to bottom. The top layer is set to soft light to enhance the brightness. Below that, a normal layer with Gaussian blur and a layer mask to soften the edges of the flames. And next, another normal layer for the base flame color. Underneath, a soft light layer with Gaussian blur to create the glowing halo around the flames. The bottom layer is set to linear dodge, also blurred, to expand and intensify the glow. By stacking these effects, I was able to create a vibrant and realistic fire effect. After completing the painting, I use nanopixel export to save the image. This feature allows you to export images at a resolution up to 400% larger than your original canvas size. To enable nanopixel, go to Visual Settings and turn on the nanopixel option. Once activated, you can find nanopixel export under File in the main menu bar. And that's it for this painting. I hope you found this process helpful and maybe even picked up some new tricks along the way. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time, and happy painting!